Scott Morrison has broken his silence.
Scott Morrison is live on the line.
We had to take some extraordinary measures to put safeguards in place, like you have on a nuclear submarine, actually. When the nuclear weapons are deployed, you have two keys as to how these things are done.
Are there any other portfolios that you assumed any control over?
Not to my recollection, Ben. I'm pursuing that.
So health, finance, resources.
That is my understanding. But if there's anything different to that, then I'm happy for that to be disclosed.
Just a couple of hours after this exchange on Sydney Radio this morning, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese decided to assist Scott Morrison's recollection.
I can say that today I've been informed by the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet that between March 2020 and May 2021, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, was appointed to 5 additional portfolios in addition to his appointment as the head of Prime Minister and Cabinet. He was appointed to administer the Department of Health on the 14th of March 2020, the Department of Finance on the 30th of March 2020, the Department of Home Affairs on the 6th of May 2021, the Department of the Treasury on 6th of May 2021, and the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources on the 15th of April 2021.
They don't jump out at you at the moment, what they could have been, those other portfolio areas?
No, because they weren't at the same level as finance and health in managing that pandemic.
It's hard to think of such a political own goal as Scott Morrison's explanation on 2GB this morning of his actions as Prime Minister, or of such a spectacular prime ministerial burn that followed it. Scott Morrison was often accused of being a liar. The question on everyone's lips in Canberra today was, why on earth would you go on radio and insist that you had only held a couple of extra jobs when you knew that your political opponents and successors were on the trail and had access to the official records? The alternative explanation is that the former Prime Minister just didn't remember being appointed Treasurer of the Commonwealth of Australia or Minister for Home Affairs.
I cannot conceive of the mindset that has created this, and I cannot conceive of how a cabinet allows that to happen.
Today felt a bit like a momentous tennis match between the former and current Prime Ministers. Scott Morrison lobbed up a defence of his actions on morning radio. Anthony Albanese volleyed it back. Scott Morrison then served up a lengthy Facebook explanation of what had happened.
These were extraordinary times, and they required extraordinary measures to respond. Our government's overriding objective was to save lives and livelihoods.
But the problem with the former Prime Minister's explanation was that all these appointments weren't made at the height of the pandemic, but instead were made at times that corresponded with very different events in the political calendar. Sure, the health appointment and the finance one a couple of weeks later, in March 2020, were made at a time, as Mr Morrison says, when
the risk of ministers becoming incapacitated, sick, hospitalised, incapable of doing their work at a critical hour, or even fatality, was very real.
Notably, the finance appointment was made the same day as the JobKeeper wage subsidy was announced at the start of the pandemic. But the appointments to the Department of Home Affairs and Treasury were made 14 months after this, in the middle of 2021. It's worth considering the context of the appointment to Home Affairs, which includes immigration. In the first week of May 2021, the government was facing a growing backlash over its ban on travellers from India.
This is another very difficult decision. I feel terribly for the Indian community.
By the Thursday of that week, May 6, the government was preparing to move.
The National Security Committee of Cabinet is meeting this afternoon.
And by evening, it had decided to order repatriation flights from India. It was this very same day Scott Morrison became the second Home Affairs Minister. It was also just 2 days after the existing Home Affairs Minister, Karen Andrews, who'd only recently been promoted, had publicly stated she was seeking advice about moving a Tamil family out of detention on Christmas Island into community accommodation. It must have been hard for Andrews to not see the revelation today of Morrison's appointment to her job as a sign that he didn't trust her to administer it, which might account for her thinly disguised anger.
It would be appropriate, in my view, for Scott Morrison to resign and to leave Parliament. It is now up to him what he chooses to do.
And then there was Morrison's appointment to Treasury, a week before Treasurer Josh Frydenberg brought down the 2021 budget. But it is Morrison's appointment to the resources portfolio that remains the most contentious for now, notably over his intervention in a controversial offshore gas exploration licence. Even he says his appointment was, quote, for separate reasons. This was the consequence of my decision to consider the issues of the licence directly, he said. The former PM insists this was the only time he used his ministerial powers. Suffice to say, the new government is undertaking a forensic study of these portfolios to ensure that this is actually true. This is not just an historic incident. Apart from the pressures it creates for administrative change and the prospects for legal actions against the Commonwealth, Scott Morrison has compromised and humiliated a coalition frontbench which remained in the dark about his actions.
It's an attack on the Westminster system of parliamentary democracy as we know it. And not just Mr Morrison, but others who were involved in this need to be held to account